The Gardener and the Boy. Chapter 6. The year is 1865. The Victorian era had vanished. In Dublin, the Georgian houses had emptied themselves of their rich landlords. However, in a certain part of the city, there is a house. In that dwelling there are 7 rooms, 2 at the front, 2 to the rear, and 3 at the bottom, and a basement that gazed up at them all. The polished floors sat under the high ceilings and the hall door marched out onto the street. Now, the owners were Peter and Elizabeth Swindle. Their marriage was childless, so they adopted a son. Their staff was many, comprising a cook, a cleaner, a gardener, and a baker. There was the chimney sweep, the handyman and the boy. The cook's name was Jenny or Miss Sanders as she preferred. The cleaner they called Jim, the gardener was Mr. Whitehead, and the boy they christened Jack. Jack's full title was John Thomas Plunker, the only remaining son of his mother. Her name was Mags, a lady we will come back to later. But for now, let us talk about her children. She had 2 sons, Jack being the youngest. As time pushed on, the older child departed this world. As life gave him a harrowing experience, so when consumption favored depriving the earth of his existence, he left abruptly. Their father Billets Plunker also absconded the planet. His exit was because of an allowance of beer and a street brawl. Mr. Billets Plunker left behind the widow and the boy, and so it came to pass in the year 1865 that Jack reached the tender age of 10, while Mr. Whitehead the gardener turned the corner at the grand old age of God knows what, for they said of him that he was a man without beginning of days. What that meant nobody knows. Even the people who said it had little knowledge of the gushing words that poured from their lips. The age difference between Jack and Mr. Whitehead made no matter, for over time the two became noble friends. Now Jack had a helpful nature, for he was the help. He attended to the cleaner, the cook, the baker, and the gardener, not forgetting the chimney sweep. But he loved to work in the garden with Mr. Whitehead. His days were interminable and the wages meager, but he got 2 enjoyable meals a day, one in the morning and one in the evening. Miss Sanders graced him with the liberty to take home any leftovers, which always comprised a generous dinner, via a hush, hush, and wink, wink. Miss Sanders, a woman of understanding, knew the daily allowance of food Jack received wouldn't feed a cat. Jack was small for his age. His hair was red, his frame thin, and he had tennis balls for knees. He overdressed in grubby clothes, and they could never accuse him, as someone who was elbowing his way up the corporate ladder. He accepted his place in the pecking order as the general slop bucket boy. Mr. Whitehead was tall, having so large a belly it looked as if he had just eaten a cow, and that before dinner. Mr. Whitehead never called a person by their name. It was me son, me lady, or me friend. He even referred to his beloved as me one and only, which when spoken sounded like this: me one and only. It was to Jack's wonderful fortune that he found favor in Mr. Whitehead's eyes, for he found little in Mrs. Swindle's. She did not like the boy. He was not overly fond of her, as he was not to her liking, and she was not to his. The matter remained confrontational. Mrs. Swindle was 10 years older than her husband. She was 55 years of age, tall, standing 6 foot and heavy in build. The reputation she had established in the house was a character of bad-natured, fierce-tempered and hard-going. Her state of mind regarding her staff, she hid. She moored that manner along a secret dock, appearing to the world as a lady of a gentle spirit, for she was skillful at wearing the mask and as deceptive as a snake in the wild. Her husband was a mild and well-composed fellow, having a learned mind. He saw life as if it was a beautiful lake and every color surrounding it was pure. It came about that on a dismal night Mrs. Swindle sat in her bedroom. She, an eternally mournful woman, took it upon herself to become merry. Having succumbed to such a flashing idea, she reached for the bottle, then for the glass. She sat on the chair. The table was near. She placed the glasses on top, and the bottle on the floor. Picking up the bottle she drew the glass near. She poured in a drop, followed by another. Sticking her finger, she gave it a swirl. The wine rippled, and her eyes ached, as the distance between her face and the glass became friends. Grey clouds rose above her as if it was water evaporating from the sea, or dust on a country road. Whatever the case, she had exhausted her sadness and labored now in the barking tongues of drunkenness. Every glass went down smoother than the previous one, as a sip became a sup, and a sup converted into a swallow. Her head went to the right and then to the left, till finding the cushion, on the chair, and her head crashed, until she awoke with a temper fouler than Bill Sack's dog. Climbing off the chair, she came to the door, where she paused and glanced sideward. Her eyes that were so nobly set in her very fine head closed. Then they opened and closed again. Her head went in one direction, her feet went in the other. With a yawn and a heckle, her feet discovered the stairs, while her hand gripped the rail, and so she wobbled, landing on firm ground. Jack returned from working in the garden. His coat hung loosely off his back, the sleeves he dragged up to his elbow, and he met a stare as he entered the door. She glared at his face, his feet, and the clothes on his back, the hard wooden floor and the muck beneath his feet. And if a look could kill, or even speak, he would have believed that she groomed his neck for the rope, his feet for the long drop, and his body for the gallows, where on a given date he would swing lifelessly, without a person's care or even their hushed cry.